you ready for another week worshiping God? I am. I'm very excited and anticipating encountering God with you through truth and through spirit. And just, again, very excited to be with you. Even though we're not physically together, again, we're together in truth and spirit. So I'm excited, and we're with God. It doesn't matter where we're at, God is here, and we're going to worship God together. So as we do that, we'll start off by singing, and then we will jump into the teaching of the Word. And I pray that you would just lean into it and be excited, and that when we're at the end of this, we can honestly say, we brought God glory and we exalted Him. Let's worship God.
All throughout my history, your faithfulness has walked beside me. Winter storms made way for spring. In every season, from where I'm standing, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises and fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. Help me remember when I'm weak. Fear may come, fear will leave. You lead my heart to victory. You are my strength, and you always will be. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises and fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. See the cross, the empty grave, the evidence is endless. All my sin rolled away because of you, oh Jesus. See the cross, the empty grave, the evidence is endless. All my sin rolled away because of you, oh Jesus. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises and fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. Yeah. I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises
Well, here we are. We are in August. Unbelievable. Michigan hates summer. We just are so quick to get back into winter, right? I know we got fall left, but excuse me. I know we have fall left, but I just don't like what's coming next. I get that it's been hot. I really do. But I just don't like where we're heading into those cold months. Again, as usual, I digress. It's great to be here with you. We are continuing on in our summer series called Heroes. And again, as I shared with you, we've talked about Noah, Abraham, we talked about Joseph, we talked about Joshua, we talked about Moses, we talked about Ruth, Deborah. Last week we looked at David. And again, all of these men and women, there's nothing intrinsically superhuman about them, but they're just like men and women like you and I, that if we allow God to carry or to fulfill His purpose through us and the calling that He has for us, amazing things can happen. God things happen. We're not creating them. God's doing them in and through us. And He's just looking for willing people to allow that to take place. Today we're going to look at yet another hero. We're going to look at one of David's sons by the name of Solomon. He is going to be the one that takes on the throne after David. We know that Solomon was born in Jerusalem. He was the second child of Bathsheba. And do you find it interesting that the bloodline of Christ is coming through an adulterous relationship? Isn't that interesting? Even if we would go clear back to Joshua, when they went into Jericho, there was a lady by the name of Rahab who was a prostitute, where she housed the spies and protected them and lied to her people because she knew that they had heard of these Israelites, And so the only thing she asked was that they would spare her and her family, in which they did. And Rahab, this prostitute, is in the bloodline of Jesus too. Very interesting story here. Very interesting stories. God's upper story, how He uses, and I don't mean that in a negative way, I'm saying how God fulfills His purpose through some individuals that you would never think of. Like you and I. Like you and I. We're not deserving of it. There's nothing that we bring to the table where God says, oh, I need them so badly. No, God chooses to. And as we participate with Him, as we submit to Him, surrender to His will, we are fulfilled. That's how we were created. We are fulfilled. And so again, there's nothing intrinsically superhuman about these men and women, but in fact, they are just like you and I. In fact, they sinned just like you and I. They struggled. They questioned from time to time, just like you and I. So for me, it brings great encouragement to read about these stories and study these lives and to realize that, yes, these people were heroes, but they were heroes in different ways, if you see what I'm saying. They were heroes because they allowed God to do His work, to bring His upper story through them. And so, as I shared with you, Solomon is the second son of Bathsheba. If you remember, their first son passed away, which just wrecked David, obviously. Again, as I shared with you, Solomon became the king after his father, and there was some jockeying going on with some of Solomon's brothers and some of the other, his half brothers, we could say. I mean, David had many wives, many sons, but there was some jockeying going on for the throne, and that's not who God promised that that Solomon would be the one. Solomon also, just some things about Solomon that we know, he built the temple for God, for people to worship there. They didn't have a place to come and worship God. Solomon built the first temple, very ornate temple. We read about that in 1 Kings chapter 6. David wanted to build this temple. David wanted to build it so bad. Just like we talked last week, his heart was for God. He wanted to build this temple so bad for God, and God said, no, David, you've got blood on your hands. You're a warrior. Your son's going to build it. And so that's what happened. Solomon built the first temple where it was the central place for the Israelites to come and to worship. During his time, again, if you look at his father David, David was a warrior. He advanced the kingdom. He enlarged the kingdom. Those were the glory days, the pinnacle days of Israel. Solomon ruled a little bit differently. He was more political and had more prosperity through economics and politics. He created all kinds of alliances with other nations, if you will. He had extensive building projects. He established trade routes that were absolutely incredible. I mean, it was very, very prosperous. David, a warrior, David advancing the kingdom, Solomon kind of advancing it in a completely different way, political and economical. Solomon is credited for writing biblical books, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, and the Song of Solomon. And through these books, it demonstrates or reflects his deep wisdom. And so that's kind of what we know about Solomon, And so perhaps one of the bigger stories that we know about Solomon is about his, a couple things, if you've read a little bit about him, is about his wisdom. Okay? He had this incredible wisdom. And this wisdom didn't come to him. Again, it wasn't something that just came to him, but he actually asked for it. And it happened in a dream, which is very interesting. So I'm going to read this to you in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 5 through 12. It says, "At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night. And God said, 'Ask what I should give you.' And Solomon replied, 'You have shown great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, righteousness, and integrity. You have continued this great faithful love for him by giving him a son to sit on his throne as it is today. Lord, my God, you have now made your servant king in my father David's place. Yet I am just a youth with no experience in leadership.'" It is thought by theologians that Solomon at this time might have been around the age of 18. Now, I think that's very interesting, right? So let's put a pin right there, because Solomon's saying that I'm just youth with no experience in leadership, okay? Probably 18 years old, let's say. And he goes on in verse 8, "Your servant is among your people you have chosen, a people," he says, "Your servant is among your people you have chosen, a people too many to be numbered or counted. So give your servant a receptive heart," wisdom. Give your servant a receptive heart to judge your people and to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours?" 18 years old, and he's asking for wisdom. He's king, he understands his position, and he understands, and again, these are God's people, and God has chosen him to govern these people. And he's young, and he's very young in his leadership skills and all. I mean, I'm sure he observed his father somewhat, but he was very young. And instead of asking for money, instead of asking for wealth and possessions and all these other things, he asked for wisdom to do what? To govern God's people. Listen how God responds. "Now it pleased the Lord that Solomon had requested this. So God said to him, 'Because you have requested this and did not ask for long life or riches for yourself or the death of your enemies, but you asked discernment for yourself to administer justice, I will therefore do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and understanding heart so that there has never been anyone like you before and never will be again.'" Amazing. 18 years old, let's say, and he's not thinking about himself. He's thinking about the task at hand. He's thinking about God's people. He's thinking about his lack of wisdom, his lack of discernment to be able to discern between good and evil properly. And instead of asking for, again, things that are about him, he asks for wisdom. God is very pleased. God says, "Because you didn't ask for all these other things, I will give you this wisdom." And we're going to see that he got all of these other things. But so the first thing that we really kind of pick up on about Solomon is he is blessed by God by all of this wisdom. Okay? The second thing, we see that wisdom being played out in his counsel as he governed people. And one of the most famous stories is when two women come to him. If you've heard this story, it's a very interesting story. Two women come to him, and they both were pregnant. They both had babies, okay? And one of them, they were sleeping with their children. They must have been in the same corridors, the same room or whatever. One of them rolled over on her child, her baby, and suffocated it, and the baby died. She then took her baby and exchanged it with the other lady's baby that was right there. And when they both, the next morning, the one wakes up and she discovers that her child, which is not really her baby, is dead. she looks at it and says, this is not my baby. You have my baby. And of course, this other one says, no, I don't. This is my child. This is my baby. And so they bring this case, they bring this predicament to Solomon. And what is Solomon going to do? So the women, let me pick up in 1 Kings chapter 3. Let's pick up in verse 22. So they discover what happened. And the other one says, no, my son is the living one, your son is the dead one. The first woman said, no, your son is, so they're before Solomon right now, and they're explaining this, and they're saying, no, this is my son, this is your son. So they argue before the king. And in verse 23, the king replied, this woman says, this is my son who is alive, and your son is dead. But that woman says, no, your son is dead, and my son is alive. Now, listen to Solomon's wisdom being put in action. He says this, bring me my sword. So they brought the sword to the king, and the king said, cut the living boy into two and give one half to this woman and one half to this other woman. And the woman whose son was alive spoke to the king because she felt great compassion for her son. My lord, give her the living baby, she said, but please don't have him killed. But the other one said, he will not be mine or yours. Cut him in two. The king responded, Solomon responded, give the living baby to the first woman and don't kill him. She is his mother. All Israel heard about the judgment the king had given, and they stood in awe of the king. Why? Because they saw that God's wisdom was in him to carry out justice. What an amazing story. That's probably one of the most, infamous stories about King Solomon's wisdom. And so we see his wisdom in action through this council. What a hard case that would have been to discern, but with the wisdom that God had given him, he was able to navigate through that. And then people stood in awe because they saw God's wisdom being administered through him to carry out justice. And so the first thing is we see wisdom, we see it carried out in counsel, and then we see with Solomon all this great wealth that he had. I mean, he had incredible wealth. Now, part of this was due to taxes, tributes and taxes, where he taxed the people. If you remember the end of his life, when his one other son, Rehoboam, I believe it was, took the throne, the young people came to him and said, look, your father was very heavy-handed in taxes. And that's what they're talking about right here. That's where Solomon got a lot of his wealth, through taxing not only just his people or God's people, but also other nations as well. He established, as I already said before, he established this incredible trade route. Okay, this incredible trade route, which then enabled them to engage in extensive trade with neighboring countries, and so they would have fleets of ships that would bring in gold and silver, ivory, and it says apes and peacocks from distant lands. I think it's so funny, bringing in apes and peacocks as well as gold and silver. So apparently apes and peacocks was a high commodity then. But nevertheless, he established this trade route that enabled them to, again, just accumulate more wealth. They mined in a lot of different areas and obtaining large quantities of gold. And then you have this story about the Queen of Sheba that wants to come and just heard of Solomon, King Solomon, and want to just very inquisitive about him and wanted to meet him and visit him. And she brought significant wealth in the form of gold, spices, and precious stones as well. Solomon was absolutely had this incredible amount of wealth. In fact, in 1 Kings, let's look at the scripture. In 1 Kings chapter 10, verses 14 through 29, it says, the weight of gold that came to Solomon annually was 25 tons. Besides what came from merchants, traders, merchandise, and all the Arabian kings and governors of the land. King Solomon made 200 large shields of hammered gold. 15 pounds of gold went into each shield. He made 300 small shields of hammered gold. Nearly 4 pounds of gold went into each shield. The king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. The king also made a large ivory throne and overlaid it with gold. The throne had 6 steps. There was rounded at the back of the throne, armrests on either side of the seat, and 2 lions standing on the armrests. I can't imagine how ornate this was. 12 lions were standing there. 12 lions were standing there on the 6 steps, one at each end. Nothing like it had ever been made in any other kingdom. All of King Solomon's drinking cups were gold. All the utensils of the house of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. There was no silver, since it was considered as nothing in Solomon's time. For the king had ships of Tarshish at sea with Hiram's fleet, and once every 3 years the ships of Tarshish would arrive bearing gold, silver, ivory, and we got apes and peacocks again. King Solomon surpassed all the kings of the world in riches and in wisdom. The whole world wanted an audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom that God had put on his heart, or in his heart. Every man would bring his annual tribute, items of silver and gold, clothing, weapons, spices, and horses and mules. Solomon accumulated 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen, and stationed them in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. He made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedar as abundant as sycamore in the Judean foothills. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and Kue. The king's traders brought him from Kue at the going price. A chariot was imported from Egypt for 15 pounds of silver and a horse for 4 pounds. In the same way, they exported them to all the kings of the Hittites and to the kings of Aram through their agents. And so we see this incredible wealth that Solomon was obtaining, okay? That it was acquiring, accumulating. So he wanted for nothing, okay? The next thing we read about then, and we start to see a slide here. We start seeing this sense of hedonism, this demonstration of hedonism, this self-absorption, this vanity, right? He had lavish feasts. And at these feasts, it would include 30 cores of fine flour and 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fattened fowl. And we find that in 1 Kings chapter 4, 22 through 23, where it talks about 180 bushels of fine flour, 360 bushels of meal, 23 10-fatted calves. His royal palace, he spent 13 years building his own palace, which was noted for its grandeur and its opulence. And we read about that in 1 Kings chapter 7, verses 1 through 12. So we're starting to see this decline. He started off with wisdom. He has this wisdom about him. And then it goes to, and it's demonstrated through his counsel. And then he starts to accumulate, and this is where I think you can kind of start seeing that we're starting to point in the wrong direction. We're starting to have this a little bit of a slide here, right? And then we read about his wives. Okay? We read about his wives. He had 700 wives, and 300 concubines. Now, some of these marriages were for political reasons, but he loved them. A lot of them. I don't know if some of them were just for political alliances. We know that he married the Pharaoh's daughter. We know that. But we also know that, they were for political reasons. And because of that, what happened then, he started marrying foreign women, whether to be, to have these alliances or whatever. But then what took place, they brought their gods with them, their false gods with them, and they led him into idolatry, which obviously was against the commandments of God. Just marrying outside of their culture was against the commandments of God. 1 Kings chapter 11, starting in verse 2, it says, from the nations about, in verse 1 describes to us these nations that he was marrying these women from. And then it says, from the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites. Now listen, this is what God had told the Israelites. You must not intermarry with them, and they must not intermarry with you. Why? Because they will turn your heart away to follow their gods. To these women, Solomon was deeply attached in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 who were concubines, and they turned his heart away. Verse 4, when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away to follow other gods. He was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord his God as his father David had been. Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Milcom, the abhorrent idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. And unlike his father David, he did not remain loyal to the Lord. At that time, Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abhorrent idol of Moab, and for Milcom, the abhorrent idol of the Ammonites, on the hill across from Jerusalem. He did the same for all his foreign wives who were burning incense and offering sacrifices to their gods. Do you see this slide? Do you see this very subtle slide? By the way, when we talk about marrying outside, when God's talking about intermarrying outside of their culture, because they're going to bring their gods, they're going to have false gods, and they're going to influence them to worship their false gods. Isn't that the same reason Paul said in the New Testament for Christians not to marry non-Christians? Because you're going to get taken away. And we get so deceived with that. It's so subtle. Look at Solomon's life. Look how subtle it was. It didn't happen overnight. It was this little slide that began to take place. I think it was this self-absorption, this vanity, where he started acquiring all this wealth. And man, that would feel good, right? Let's have the parties, man. Let's have the parties, he started getting focused on himself. And the next thing you know, he's over here and he starts intermarrying into these foreign nations for political reasons, for other reasons maybe, I don't know. And look where it took him. That slide. That's why it is so critical for Christians to marry Christians. Enough is enough. God was upset with Solomon. And it ended up resulting in the division of the kingdom. After he dies and his sons take over, the kingdom splits. 10 of the tribes go to the north, 2 of them go to the south. The kingdom of Israel split. Look what happens. Sin has such negative impact. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 9 through 13. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He had commanded him about this so that he would not follow other gods, but Solomon did not do what the Lord had commanded. Then the Lord said to Solomon, since you have done this and did not keep my covenant and my statutes, which I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. However, I will not do it during your lifetime for the sake of your father David. I will tear out of your son's hand. I will tear it out of your son's hand. Yet I will not tear the entire kingdom away from him. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem that I chose. Because we know that Jesus Christ is going to come from the bloodline of David, which would have been Judah or Benjamin. So what makes him a hero? Now let me just say this. As I was preparing for this, I'm like, this might be a tough one. Because I'm not so sure Solomon was a hero. But there's something that happens within Solomon's life, and it seems as if, you may disagree with me, and I get that. This is kind of one of those where, it could kind of go both ways. Did Solomon ever turn back to God? That's the question. Some suggest that he never did, but some do. And I think when you look to the book of Ecclesiastes that he wrote, it seems as if his heart turned back to God. It seems as if he had this deep sense of spiritual introspecting going on. Because throughout this book, there's 12 chapters. And just to summarize it very quickly, in the first chapter, he talks about the issue of vanity and self-obsession, right? And the cycles and the cyclical cycles of nature and life. In chapter 2, he starts talking about the meaning of life. The true meaning of life, and examining his pursuits to discover that, meaning that he looks back and it's not through wealth, it's not through wisdom, it's not through these other things that I made an idol that made him come up empty. Chapter 3, there's a time for everything. Chapter 4, the empty gain of extreme hard work. That doesn't mean we don't work hard, but it's saying there's a point to where work becomes an idol. Chapter 5, the right posture for worship. The illusion or whatever of self-obsession of pursuing wealth. Chapter 6, the shortcoming of wisdom and hedonism. Chapter 7, using wisdom the proper way. The difficulty of obtaining true righteousness. Chapter 8, obedience. The inevitability of death and the mystery of it. Chapter 9, how to enjoy life correctly, and also the uncertainty of life that hits us all. Chapter 10, wisdom and folly contrasted. Chapter 11, the uncertainty of success and how to really enjoy your life. Chapter 12, as he concludes his writing, remember your Creator. He writes in Ecclesiastes chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, when all has been heard, the conclusion of the matter is this: fear God and keep His commands, because this is for all humanity. For God will bring every act to judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. It seems to me that Solomon had a moment where he turned back to God. Now, again, you may disagree with me, and I couldn't argue that with you. Some say he did, some say he didn't. But I think that's what would make him a hero, as he writes Ecclesiastes, that he turns back to God. And I'm not trying to stretch that. I'm just saying that I think it gives credibility or credence to the fact that he did. But the takeaway for you and I is this. As we look at Solomon's life, can you see how subtle it is where you start off, and then somehow we get so subtly deceived and we get taken away from God, whether it be through wealth, whether it be through even wisdom, whether it be through marrying outside of our culture, meaning that Christian versus Christian instead of Christian marrying an unchristian. We get taken away. We get taken away. Satan, the evil one, is so deceptive to steal our hearts. Solomon's heart got stolen. And I hope and pray that he did turn back to God at the end, as Ecclesiastes seems to indicate. As I close, I want to share this with you at every meal, and as I pray for my kids. There's one thing that I pray about, tag on at the end. I ask God to bless the food, and then I ask God this: would you please guard our hearts and our minds from Satan, from the enemy? It's subtle, my friend. We see it with him. If he turned back like I think he did in Ecclesiastes, that makes a genuine hero. I don't know where you're at. You may be about you. Your life may be about you right now. I pray that you would turn back and be a hero. And allow God to guard your heart and your mind from the enemy. It was great being with you once again. I pray that you stick with us and be with us again next week as we begin to head into the final little leg of our summer series called Heroes. Have a great week.
Generations falling down in worship to sing the song of ages to the Lamb.